So hi you all and welcome. I'm Jeff Gedman with American Purpose. As it is in these things, others will be joining in progress in the next 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 minutes. I'm happy to welcome you. I'm happy to tell you that this briefing and conversation includes two friends and former colleagues. Abubakar, welcome to you. You'll be properly introduced in a moment by our moderator. And you, Jay Tolson, what a distinguished career you have and have had and are having. Jay has been with the Wilson Quarterly, U.S. News and World Report, at RFERL, Radio Free Radio Liberty. He was my colleague, first leading the Central Newsroom and then later becoming director of all news services for the entire organization. Jay is currently at the University of Virginia, where he's editor of the Hedgehog Review. I think you know it. If you haven't looked recently, do look at the Hedgehog Review. Jay, it is a tremendously handsome and elegant and smart publication, I say with full respect and admiration for what you and your team do. The conversation is 1 hour today. The first 30 minutes, Jay and Abubakar in conversation. The second 30 minutes will be open Q&A, hard stop 1 p.m. Eastern. Abubakar, again, welcome. Jay will more properly introduce you. And Jay, thanks for doing this. Great to see you.
Good to see you, Jeff. Good to see you. It's a real pleasure and honor to be the moderator in this little talk with Abubakar. Can you hear me at this point? Can you hear me?
I can.
We do, loud and clear.
Okay. It's great to be here talking with all of you today. Abubakar Siddique, as you have seen in the mailing that Jeff sent out, is an analyst and journalist with Radio Free Europe. Specifically now, he runs the Gandhara blog for the radio. He's reported from and about Afghanistan and Pakistan and the region for many years now. He knows the players. He's been on the ground, sometimes uncomfortably on the ground, in very close proximity to the Taliban. He is the author of The Pashtun Question, the unresolved key to the future of Pakistan and Afghanistan. And I hope to come back to that question, whether it has been resolved. But let's start with something a little more specific and immediate. And Abubakar, how do Afghans look at US-led effort to broker quick peace in Afghanistan?
Well, I think the Afghans are broadly divided. Of course, ordinary Afghans from all ethnicities, all parts of Afghanistan, all religious backgrounds, everybody is really thirsty for peace. They want peace because this country has been at war for more than 4 decades, which has seen terrible human suffering. There is no Afghan family today that has not lost a family member or has not seen displacement. I mean, just imagine that today's Afghanistan's population is estimated to be 35 million, and over the course of 40 years, more than 5 million Afghan have died, or they've been injured in the fighting in their country, or they were victims of landmines, and more than 10 million were displaced. Afghanistan's diaspora is now the largest in the world, one of the largest, I think. So ordinary Afghans want peace. That's their main demand. That's their main wish. But the Afghan elites, that's a different question. Where we are now today is that the American forces are supposed to leave Afghanistan by May 1, according to this agreement that the United States signed with the Taliban in February last year. in Doha, but the signs on the ground point to the likelihood that American forces won't be able to leave Afghanistan. The US is doing a lot of diplomacy to see if this deal can be salvaged, to see probably to kind of deliver a quick fix peace deal, primarily between the Taliban and the Afghan government. But both sides have so far, they are talking not to each other, but they're talking at each other, and they've rejected each other's proposals for peace.
You talk about the elites being a little more unclear about where they stand. Who are the cast of characters now that we should be listening to?
Well, the
Beyond
cast of
Ashraf Ghani.
Of course, I mean, the first and foremost person we should know about is Afghanistan's elected president, Ashraf Ghani, who is an anthropologist by training, an academic. In the past 2-3 days, I was listening to his long lectures, one of which he delivered probably sometime early this week before going for a surgery. And in these very long, like 2-hour lectures, he is talking about his government's vision for peace, which is, as you expect from somebody with the intellect of Ashraf Ghani, is very comprehensive, is kind of asks the right questions. And of course, it's primarily, driven towards protecting what he sees as Afghanistan's national interests. The other elites in Afghanistan, I mean, there are two kinds of elite in Afghanistan. One kind of elite is the elite that is fighting against the Afghan government, which formally calls itself the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, this political system that came into being and is being run with American international assistance. And then there are the Taliban elites. Within the pro-republic elite, there are kind of deepening divisions at some level, because many of the players, such as the former president Hamid Karzai, Ghani's political rival Abdullah, and other, I think they are broadly positioning themselves to somehow be part of the expected interim arrangement that is expected to, it's not expected, it's actually demanded, it's part of these discussions. While Ashraf Ghani has proposed his own peace plan, which basically wants election to be the main instrument of transfer of power. The Taliban, on the other hand, are a very different story. The Taliban, during the past, ever since the Taliban began talking to the Americans in Doha, they have a sense of empowerment. I mean, they really feel that they are empowered because these negotiations have given them a lot of legitimacy. In their internal view, they think that the Americans negotiated with them because the Americans were looking for an honorable exit. And that's what this agreement that the Taliban signed with the Americans gave them. So militarily, they think that they are on a march towards victory. They control large parts of Afghanistan, rural Afghanistan in particular. They don't control any major city, but they see, in their view, the future government will be something, a return to their government in the 1990s, which they formally call the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, which will be a Sharia state. These elites are essentially in many ways jostling for power while they talk about peace in their country.
Abubakar, in many ways, this sounds like the continuation of everything we've heard before, with perhaps a slightly more muscular position coming from the Taliban, who are feeling a little more confident. So is there any kind of new talk? Is there anything new coming out about possibly a more federated state that is less centralized? as a possible way of getting beyond what sounds like really an unbrokerable position about who will control Afghanistan. Are we hearing anything like that on the ground?
Well, I think on the immediate worry or immediate interests of many of these players that I named and described, their immediate interest is in gaining power and then kind of discussing the details of an interim government or a transitional government, something like that. The question about a federated Afghanistan, a decentralized Afghanistan is, I think, I mean, a lot of foreign experts or foreign experts of Afghanistan are interested in, but I think the Afghan elites are not ready to discuss it in detail. I mean, there are some elites, particularly leaders of minority ethnic groups in Afghanistan who have been historically interested in this question. But I think the two main parties, which is Ashraf Ghani's administration and the Taliban, are kind of opposed to it. The Taliban have never said that they are going to accept some kind of a federal arrangement. The Taliban think their foundational myth is that they are this rebellion against anarchy that all kinds of warlords imposed on Afghanistan in the 1990s. So I have not seen anything in the Taliban literature or leadership statements that indicates that they are even considering this thing. As a matter of fact, I think like any state, the Afghan state needs some degree of decentralization, but it might not be the federalism that we see in Afghanistan's neighborhood in countries such as India and Pakistan, which are constitutionally federal republics. Maybe in Afghanistan, a good model will be that like there will be, for example, elected local governments or something, but it's all, I think that is something that eventually that question will be settled once the elites settle on power and the kind of state they want. And I think from all indication, what I get, most of them still are ready to live in a kind of a unitary state that they always had.
Moving a minute from the Afghans themselves, but how do you see the various interested regional powers and not just regional powers around Afghanistan behaving at this point? What do you see, not just Pakistan, but Russia and other players, China, doing in Pakistan right now to complicate or move things toward some kind of settlement?
Well, I think basically all of Afghanistan's neighbors and all of Afghanistan's immediate neighbor, that includes the three big regional and global powers, China, Russia, and India, they are basically jostling for what they see is protecting their core interests in Afghanistan. I mean, I'll begin with, I think, Iran, because that's the country that's not really focused on a lot in these discussions, because everybody talks about Pakistan, and I'll come to Pakistan. The Iranian foreign minister, Jawad Zarif, did a very interesting interview with an Afghan television station in December. And in that interview, he mentioned that he actually offered the Afghan government that that Iran will help the Afghan government to ally with Fatimiyun Brigade, or the Iran will help Kabul will ally Fatimiyun Brigade, which is primarily made of Afghan Hazara fighters fighting on Iran's behalf in Syria to fight against the Islamic State. So in so many words, it was an Iranian declaration that, like Pakistan, they have armed proxies inside Afghanistan in the form of the Fatimiyun militia, which reportedly has thousands and thousands of fighters. So that's one of the things. On the positive side, we have seen Pakistan Iran, Pakistan, Russia, China, and United States united in a statement or declaration of intent in this meeting in Moscow last month, in which these four countries who call themselves Troika plus 3+1, Pakistan and the three big powers, where they said that they basically pushed for reconciliation and among Afghans, but they categorically said that they do not accept a return to the Taliban Islamic Emirate. So, I mean, at least nominally, diplomatically, on the front, Russia and United States, China and Pakistan are united in this effort, which is basically what Ambassador Khalilzad is doing. Turkey is supposed to host a conference in which these countries will participate, but Washington now wants to include India, and Pakistan is opposed to kind of including India because Pakistan feels that, I mean, all of Pakistan's energies were against India. So there is a degree of disunity that we are already seeing. In Pakistan, my sense is, and I wrote a story about it, that in Pakistan, the sense deep down within the security establishment is that once again, they have won another round of war in Afghanistan. And so they see themselves very much as the main power broker, essentially, because the Taliban leadership, the Taliban sanctuaries are still in Pakistan. And the Taliban are, to a degree, dependent on Pakistan. I mean, Pakistan is still the most influential external actor able to influence the Taliban. I'm not sure. I mean, a lot of Afghans will see Pakistan as a master of the Taliban. There are now other voices who see this a patron-client relation, who see Taliban nothing more than Pakistan's proxies. But I think the relationship is more complicated. But at least in Pakistan, that's the sense. Pakistan also wants to, but in the Afghan government's view, in many people that I talk to, they think that Pakistan wants to get rid of Ashraf Ghani and many of the nationalist Afghan nationalist elements that are part of his government. So again, Pakistan thinks that Afghan Islamists, who traditionally were Pakistan's allies, are ascendant, they are on the rise, they are on the march. So that's Pakistan is, I think, feels that it is in a very good position. But I don't see that, I mean, all these countries, I mean, there is some talk of getting these countries to cooperate within a UN framework or a UN brokered something. But maybe what is really needed is a formal agreement which kind of guarantees Afghanistan's neutrality, Afghanistan's sovereignty. One important actor in this whole, I mean, one of the most important actors in this whole thing is, I think, China, because China's global and regional posture has changed in the past decade. China is now a very active player in Afghanistan. It has developed good bilateral relations with Afghanistan. It is on papers at least one of the biggest foreign investors in Afghanistan. And China sees some key interests in security interests in Afghanistan because northeast of Afghanistan, this province called Badakhshan and the Wakhan corridor high in the Pamir Mountains that connects China to Afghanistan. And China feels that in future, this remote territory might pose a major security threat because Uyghur separatists, Uyghur nationalists, they might carve out a sanctuary there. We have seen some propaganda literature from Uyghur militants, Islamist militants doing this. So maybe that feeds into Chinese fears. But more importantly, China's Belt and Road Initiative. China is now the biggest foreign investors in most of Afghanistan's neighbor, and I mean, not immediate neighborhood, even near neighborhood, in countries such as Egypt. China just signed a $400 billion I mean, this is an estimate dollar investment agreement with Iran that will span over 25 years. China is already investing tens of billions of dollars in infrastructure projects in Pakistan. So China is, I think, like really the big elephant in the room, but I have not seen any major diplomatic effort from China that kind of is working to protect Chinese interests in Afghanistan. And China, as far as I know, Afghanistan is not part of any of the major trade and transport corridors that China is carving across this region, both in South Asia and in Central Asia and West Asia around Afghanistan.
Abubakar, let's get back on the ground for a minute. Obviously, the women's question is huge. At least it's perceived to be huge from the West, but it is important. Obviously, many women are particularly educated. Let's say westernized women are very worried about what might happen. But are the Taliban doing anything themselves to message to women that their condition will not be dire if a strict Islamic order is reestablished? What are you hearing from the ground about how the Taliban themselves are dealing with this issue?
Well, the Taliban diplomatic office in Qatar, it usually meets these kind of westernized women that you described, and they try to, they give out interview to the media, and they say that they will give Afghan women rights in accordance to Islam. But I mean, the real test of Taliban promises is in the regions where that they are already controlling. And the regions they are already controlling in southern Afghanistan, in eastern Afghanistan, in southeastern Afghanistan, they are not very different from the Taliban regime in 1990s. They are enforcing gender segregation. They are allowing women education only, I think, up till for primary classes, for primary school. They there have been instances of women being punished severely for alleged crimes such as stoning or lashing or these other things that happened during the Taliban regime. So for Afghan women, I don't see that there is anything that the Taliban in particularly are doing anything differently. I mean, today we have in most Muslim countries some kind of an Islamist movement. And in many of these countries where they have Islamist movements, even in countries like Turkey or Egypt or Tunisia or some other, even in Pakistan, women are part of the political organizations in those countries. In Pakistani Islamist political parties have women representatives in the parliament. I have yet to know about a Taliban women representative, either in Qatar or somewhere in Afghanistan. So I think many Afghan women are justified to be very afraid of living under a Taliban government again.
Abubakar, I have to return to my big question, then I'll turn the questioning over to others here. But your book, of course, is the Pashtun question, the Pashtun question. Yeah. And has there, first of all, would you say very quickly what it is, the big question, and whether the world or Afghanistan has moved any closer to resolving that question, to answering it?
Well, I think the Pashtun question is the fate and destiny of more than 50 million Pashtuns, which is still the world's largest tribal society, tribally organized society, divided between Afghanistan and Pakistan. This society, the Pashtuns traditionally had, there were many historically in near history, not in far history, many Pashtuns families or dynasties reign empire in regions that comprise today's Afghanistan, Pakistan, parts of India, and parts of Iran. So the Pashtun question is describing the division. My book was a research book. I probed what is happening with Pashtuns, which were their homeland was at the center of the global war on terrorism, and why Pakistan and whether Pakistan and Afghanistan can exist as peaceful neighbors, and what roles Pashtuns can play in bringing about that eventuality. So my book was not about crediting or discrediting anybody's claims or counterclaims. It was a research about the fate of these people who then and even now are one of the worst victims of local and global terrorism. So I mean, essentially what I concluded was that yes, for Pashtuns, it's possible to be the citizen of Afghanistan, to be citizens of Pakistan, and at the same time, these two countries can cooperate and live as peaceful neighbors. But unfortunately, things have not turned that way during the past 7-8 years when my book was published in 2014. Afghanistan, the government of Afghanistan, the government of Pakistan, they are not on good terms today even. They have this big mistrust. I think in 2014, to his credit, Afghan President Ashraf Ghani really tried an approach very similar to what I outlined in my book, which was that, I mean, Afghanistan and Pakistan should not be haunted by this colonial legacy of the Durand Line, this border that was the British carved between I mean the middle of Pashtun heartland in the two countries. That is today's border between the two countries, or contested borders to some. In fact, I think both states in some ways, and mostly Pakistan, has gone with kind of a hard realpolitik military approach to secure its borders. For example, Pakistan has since then built a huge wall, a huge fence on the Durand Line, which is going to be complete soon. It's nearly more than 2,500 kilometers. In Pakistan, the Pashtuns have launched a big movement, particularly Pashtuns of the region, of mostly from the tribes that transcend this Durand Line, that live in both countries. They are demanding basic human rights, all these things. Pakistan overall has moved towards authoritarianism. When I was writing the book, when I first published the book, we had a peaceful transition of power in Pakistan the year before, in 2013, between two civilian governments. Now the government in Pakistan is by and large categorized as a hybrid regime, where the military is really ruling the country through in a government that many people in the country accuse of being a civilian facade for the military. So things have not gone the right way. One thing that both Pakistan and Afghanistan have not tried, and I think that again, Pakistan has not embarked on that path, is to change their relations through increased trade, people-to-people contacts, and kind of to frame their bilateral relationship in a more regional framework, where, for example, Pakistan needs access to Central Asian markets, and that can only happen if it has good relations with Afghanistan. Afghanistan needs land access to India, and that can only happen through land access through Afghanistan. So unfortunately, most of the things have gone the bad way. I'm very disappointed in many leaders in the two countries who cannot see beyond their immediate political interests, because I mean, the region is now, if, for example, both countries want to go ahead with this kind of economic cooperations that they both need for lifting their populations out of poverty. We are talking about more than 270 million people in these two countries. they need this economic transformation, but their leaders are basically still, I think, obsessed with what they think are their strategic or security interests, which, of course, most of these interests are not, they're basically not related to the welfare of their people.
Thank you, Abubakar. Let's move beyond my questions and to the questions of the others here. I think Richard Kramer has one which he may want to just ask in his own voice. Richard?
Sure. Thank you very much, Jay. I'm going to keep off the video if that's okay.
That's fine.
Abubakar, great to see you. Read the Pashtun question. Knew you when I worked at NED. I'm happy to see that you're still so engaged at RFE and reporting, letting the world know what's going on in Afghanistan. So, I commend you, if I may, for your works. Question I have is about the Taliban and incentives. I think the Taliban they've been pretty consistent in putting on a very stern face about the questions of compromise on issues which they may or may not. And I'd like to hear from you, what areas do you think there would be some space for what issues do you think where the Taliban may compromise, and what kind of incentives, be they carrots or sticks, would help them be more open to that prospect around these issues? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ned. I think this is something that this diplomatic approach that Washington has been carrying out since 2018 was centered around. I think one of the main incentives the current diplomatic approach is offering is promises of future aid to Afghanistan, or a state where the Taliban are part of the political system. But I mean, what I've not seen from Afghanistan, from the Taliban is, I mean, they do indicate in their literature, in their statements, even in their speeches, they say that they are committed to an Afghanistan or an Afghan government that's broad-based, that includes representation from all parts of the Afghan society and all these good kind of PR points. But internally, I mean, when the Taliban signed the Doha Agreement with the United States, one of their leaders, Mullah Fazil, who was in Guantanamo for many years, he's now a leading negotiator in Doha. He was sent to Quetta in southwestern Pakistan, in the province of Balochistan, to talk to Taliban commanders. And I happen to have listened to his speech, which is available, I think, also on social media, in which he talked at length about the future government. And he made 2 or 3 big points. One is that the future government will have an Amir that is a Taliban Amir. So he was obviously referring to the Taliban leader being the commander of the faithful in this government. He also said that we would like to include other Afghans, but only as individuals, not as kind of parties. So that means that Afghans who are not Taliban can be part of a future Taliban administration, which was the case even when they were ruling back in the 90s. Everybody in the Afghan government was not a mullah. Everybody in the Taliban administration was not a member of the Taliban. There were many professional diplomats or other government workers who had nowhere to run, or who didn't want to leave Afghanistan, and they worked with the Taliban. So the main incentive, of course, is this one. I think for the Taliban ranks, it is important for the Taliban supporters, because I have reported this story many times. The Taliban supporters are as much victims of violence and abuse and discrimination and lots of cruelties, atrocities as other Afghans are. So in their constituency, there is support among their support base. There is support for the peace. But I think the Taliban have not kind of exactly worked on a compromise. I think obviously I hear a lot from many Afghans who think that, for example, in this big diplomatic conference in Turkey, one of the major incentive will be this kind of carrot of guaranteed or continued international assistance. But I think internally the Taliban are still broadly committed to this recreation of their emirate at so many levels, even if they, for example, do not necessarily rename as Islamic Emirate. I think that one big question that looms over the Taliban future is that, I mean, what kind of compromise they can make. I think as far as things stand now, and I feel that this is the basic reason for the Taliban committing to the militancy, to violence. The Taliban see their future in a military way, in terms of military conquest, not in terms of political compromise. Taliban were never a political movement. I mean, if you go to Pakistan, all these madrasas or Islamic religious schools where the Taliban leaders were educated and where a lot of their foot soldiers still graduate from, these madrasas are run by political mullahs of Jamiat Ulama Islam, and it's a very conservative Islamist political party in Pakistan. But that party is completely non-violent and committed to the political process. Its leader, Maulana Fazlur Rahman, is now the leader of a main opposition bloc, the Pakistan Democratic Movement in Pakistan. So, but I don't see that kind of commitment, that kind of understanding, those kinds of discussions within the Taliban. They still see themselves in these terms of fighting a jihad against the infidels, or as they call the Afghan government and Afghans allied with the international community or Western allies, as puppets.
Okay, Abubakar, David Enzor, I think, has a question, and then we will move to Greg Pfeiffer's question. He has a question. David, good to see you.
Good to see you, Jay. Abubakar, thank you for this very interesting conversation. I have two questions. One is Afghans. I served as a diplomat in Kabul in 2010-11, and a number of Afghan officials in the government used to say to me, "You Americans don't seem to understand. Your policy to Pakistan makes no sense. You don't seem to realize that there wouldn't even be a Taliban that was viable in any way, if not for the ISI. And it's really all of this whole thing is about Pakistan and about the Pakistani military's desire to keep Afghanistan weak and bloody so that they can control it, and that India will never become, have a close ally that's powerful and close to, and start surrounding Pakistan." So tell me, were those Afghans that told me that right or wrong? And my second question is, if we withdraw, the United States withdraws its forces, and presumably many other NATO countries do as well, do you think the Taliban would take over? And if it does, do you expect terrorism on American streets within the next few years or not?
Okay, thank you for asking the most difficult questions. I think my answer to the first one will be that I think both the Taliban and Pakistan are not monoliths. Pakistani state has a very sophisticated, in some ways, very sophisticated approach towards Afghanistan. I think at some point, Pakistan did enjoy a lot more control over the Taliban. For example, when the Taliban regime was in power in the 1990s, and Pakistan was one of the few countries that recognized that regime. I feel that, I mean, what research I have done, the Taliban, former Taliban leaders that I've interviewed, looking at their statements and everything, I don't think that the Taliban are just only, I mean, Pakistan's stooges or robots that somehow Pakistan is controlling. I think a lot of the Mujahideen in the 1980s were in a same position or a similar position as today's Taliban commanders or Taliban leaders. I think if you look at like, I'll give you one example of trying to understand this relationship, where at one end of the spectrum is this and another end of the spectrum is that some people in Taliban think that eventually they will also have a lot more influence in Pakistan, is the 2016 killing of Mullah Mansour. Mansour was the Taliban leader after Mullah Omar. He was, apart from being the Taliban leader, he was, I think, one of the key figures in the Afghan drug trade. He was killed inside Pakistan by an American missile. And who do you think wanted him dead? Mullah Mansour, the day he was killed, he had returned from Iran. So this whole thing about the Taliban being nothing more, I think it's kind of a very simplistic way of looking at it. Taliban are, after all, an Afghan Islamist organization. You might agree, disagree with what they preach, what they do, but that's the reality. Otherwise, they won't be only because of like Pakistani support or whatever, they won't be able to do this. But it's also true that the Taliban, that Pakistan has a way to influence the Taliban, which secures what the Talibani military, what the Pakistani military thinks are its key security interests.
Okay, Abu Bakr, would you answer his second question? Because I know there's several other questions forming.
Yeah, the second question, so I forgot, it was about whether...
How likely is terrorism? In other words, terrorist groups, Al-Qaeda or others, coming back to Afghanistan and it once again becoming a place from which terrorism can be organized against the United States?
Yes, I think like in this, again, there are supposed to be these secret annexes to the Taliban agreement with the United States, which are supposed to monitor the Taliban, guarantee with Al-Qaeda. But what we know as a fact that right now there are perhaps hundreds or thousands of Islamists, militants, foreign militants, active, many of them embedded within the Taliban in Afghanistan. So I don't think that once America leaves Afghanistan to its fate and Afghanistan's after post American withdrawal is something similar to Afghanistan after the collapse of the socialist regime in 1992, that you will see Islamic militancy celebrating as a major victory against non-Muslims, and the day might not be far that we will see a return of international terrorism. After all, America has to return to Iraq after withdrawing precipitously.
Okay, thank you, Abu Bakr, and thank you, David, for those very on-point questions. Matt, let's see, Greg Pfeiffer, I know you have a question, or at least one question.
Thanks very much, Jay. Terrific to see you, Abu Bakr. As ever, so interesting to hear your analysis. We talked about Afghanistan a lot when we were both colleagues in Prague some years ago. And so I wanted to ask you whether your with apologies, I have two questions. If you can't get to the second one, that's perfectly fine. Whether your views about the U.S. involvement have changed since we talked a number of years ago. And you know, depending on your answer, how would you justify to Americans remaining involved in Afghanistan? After all, our country's longest military engagement. And my second question is about Russia. Now, of course, Moscow positions itself as a mediator in this conflict, but what do you see Russia's real motives being as you see them playing out on the ground? And of course, we've seen so much evidence over the past number of years that one of the overriding motives, at least how I see it, is to undermine the U.S. role in Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Great to see you after so many years virtually. I mean, the US involvement is, I think, the basic argument I'll make is that it's for the American interests. America has key interests in preventing the return of international terrorism that threatens its interests in the region and also at home in America. So a precipitous withdrawal from Afghanistan, a badly managed transition in Afghanistan, this will all give international jihadists a victory that they're looking for. And the other thing is that I don't think that for Afghans, from an Afghan perspective, I think you have to understand that the Afghans, this international involvement in Afghanistan or the US invasion of Afghanistan or military engagement with Afghanistan was very different from Soviet occupation that you really, I mean, you did a terrific job of documenting that in your book about the Soviet occupation of the country. The Afghans broadly welcomed international engagement. They largely expected more from it. They wanted not only to get development from this material development and advancement, but also they basically thought that it will end the war in Afghanistan. And that's, I think, is still by and large what the major Afghan expectation is. And Afghanistan is a country that's, I don't have to explain to you its strategic importance, where it's located and all that. Of course, I mean, many of my American friends make the argument that Afghanistan is so 10,000 miles away from America and we cannot stay there forever. But the US has 200, more than, I think, hundreds of military bases, and the US forces are everywhere. So engagement in Afghanistan can be in many ways. It can be a diplomatic engagement. It can be, America has already signed many bilateral agreements, including strategic agreements. That's something the NATO, Afghanistan is a major non-NATO ally. So I think it's primarily the big argument is American self-interest. And about Russia, it's a very important question. I did a piece about it. It's also very baffling for me because the Russian engagement in this phase of Afghanistan was very nominal. Putin basically supported or blanketly supported American actions in Afghanistan after 2001 and did nothing. But by the time NATO left in 2014, Russia changed its posture. And of course, with Syria and everything, Russia, there were some efforts by Russia, which ties into this whole thing about Russian bounties on killing to the Taliban to kill American soldiers, that Russia turned against the American involvement in Afghanistan. But right now, Russia is doing which my limited expert, I'm not an expert unlike you, I'm not an expert on Russia, but with my little understanding of Russian domestic politics, I think it's one person, this Russian Putin special envoy for Afghanistan, Kabulov, who is responsible for the current approach, which is basically supporting the Taliban, or arguing for a Taliban return to the Afghan thing. But I don't think that the Russians have really thought out their approach to Afghanistan well, because Russia today does not have any resources to commit to Afghanistan. It does not have military to station in Afghanistan. It cannot replace Americans' current role in propping up the Afghan state, in supporting and funding the Afghan state.
Thank you. I have a question from MJ Crawford, who might be Matt Crawford, but I'm not sure. It might be another Crawford, but ask away, please.
Hi there. I'm Melissa, actually.
Different
But no,
Crawford. Okay.
no problem. I am actually currently based in Islamabad, working at our embassy, but this is just purely personal perspective, personal questions and opinion. I am actually reading Thomas Barfield's book right now on Afghanistan, and it's like a pretty dry book. He doesn't have necessarily any arguments or anything. It's just a history. But one thing I've been really struck by is far before the British entered Afghanistan, and obviously the Soviet Union, there just seems to be a very long history already of uncles and brothers fighting for power in Afghanistan. And throughout the history, I've never really been able to see any time when the country was like truly at peace, truly not fighting off foreign invaders or not involved in some sort of civil conflict. And I just wanted to know, from you, and also too, like every other day, just on like the news, like I just see like different attacks happening in Afghanistan against women judges, against students, against journalists, and I definitely can understand why people in the country want the U.S. to continue to stay there. And I just wanted to know from you, how many generations do you think it would take to really solve and heal a lot of the trauma and violence that has already been experienced? And as part of a two-part question, from the young Afghans that you know, what is their current mindset? Like, are some committed to staying within Afghanistan to help rebuild their society? Or are they kind of just really looking to immigrate and move out? Anything from that, where you think maybe the country might be in 20 years would be really interesting. Thank you.
Well, I think that Afghanistan has, I mean, the Afghan society in many ways has come a long way from being an isolated society in the heart of Asia. That's one thing I think Tom Barfield's book portrays really well. Most of his research was, let's remember, was before the war in Afghanistan. He was there in the 70s and all that. So to your question directly, and I think it's a very good question, today's Afghan society is mostly young. Afghanistan, the maiden age is 18 years, which compared to the US, I think, where the maiden age is 42 years, is a lot younger. So this youth bulge in Afghanistan, the youth in Afghanistan, I think, like the youth anywhere, they want a good life, they want to stay in their country. I don't think that any Afghan, they want to leave Afghanistan because they have any great dreams of better life, but it's mostly because of what they suffer through daily that makes them decide to leave. I think that if Afghanistan has peace, that's the primary requirement, because Afghanistan underwent kind of a lot of material development in the past 20 years. Afghanistan, there was huge influx of international aid, even despite all the corruption, mismanagement, and all these things. A lot of money did kind of filter through to the grassroots of the Afghan society. We have, I think, in most Afghan cities, a kind of an affluent middle class. We have a lot of Afghans compared to 20 years ago that are interested in better living conditions. I mean, just go to any Afghan city and you will see these tremendous big housing schemes, which tells you that the Afghans, like people anywhere else, are interested in a normal life. But the big question is about whether the Afghan state can hold together in this key transition where, if, for example, the Western military forces, the US military and allies, they leave, will they leave behind a state that is capable of providing security to its people? And the best way they're doing it now is through this political process, through this diplomatic process of reconciliation among Afghans. But there might be alternatives to it. There might be that Afghanistan will find a regional ally that is able to fund its state. I don't think that India and China are ready to do that. But I think that one thing we should not forget about Afghans is that Afghans are incredibly resilient people. Just in the past month, they built and inaugurated a major dam close to Iranian border, and that dam is supposed to deliver a lot of agriculture, kind of a new breadbasket to one part of Afghanistan, in the province called Nimroz on Iran border. So I think with if their state can survive this storm, and this year is a very critical year for Afghanistan, then I have no doubt that Afghans can prosper, and they have prospered. I mean, just imagine that Afghanistan's exports are now, I mean, that's the Afghan government's claim, are more than $1 billion. The state revenue have increased. It's not an ideal state, but at least Afghanistan has taken many steps in the right direction.
Thank you.
Abubakar, I know there are probably others who have, I'm looking around quickly, I don't see any hands up or anything. Maybe I will return this to Jeff, but also with a word of thanks to Jeff, not just for this session, but for creating so many lively sessions during the relatively short existence of his publication, An American Purpose, which I'm always tempted to call the American Porpoise, since I have an animal as the name of my publication. I just want to thank him and the Purpose for staging these kinds of conversations and publishing important work on so many topics, but they all seem to have a great relevance to what we're dealing with both domestically and internationally. And so many thanks, Jeff. And you ought to ask the last question.
Well, Jay, thank you so much. That's very gracious. I'm tickled to spend this time with you all. Abubakar, that was splendid. Jay, to everybody, read Hedgehog Review, read Abubakar. There's a link to his site in chat. And it's just good to be with all of you. On where you ended up, Jay, not a question, but an observation. There was last year a series of articles in the Washington Post on where we are, where we've come in Afghanistan. And somewhere buried in one of the articles in considerable gloom and doom for the series as a whole was the paragraph embedded in all that has been accomplished, actually, with all the flaws and all the shortcomings, as you said, Abubakar, so imperfect it is that a lot of men and women here and there fighting and fighting and fighting for a decent life and some fashion of accountable government and human rights. So anyway, thank you, David. Great to see you and Greg and Dan and everybody else, MJ, Rich, everybody on this call. Just what a nice conversation. I'm grateful.
Thanks a million, Jeff. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, thank you all. Have a great day, great evening. Bye now.